The cold metal of the train seat bit through Darcy Miller's thin dress as the locomotive rumbled westward through the vast expanse of Montana Territory. 1883. Her entire life had been reduced to a single carpetbag, a marriage contract, and the promise of security with a stranger named Thomas Blackwell in the frontier town of Whispering Pines. At 22, with no family and dwindling prospects in Boston, becoming a mail-order bride had seemed her only escape from destitution after the textile factory closed. Darcy pressed her forehead against the window, watching the endless prairie blur past. The landscape grew wilder with each passing mile, so different from the crowded streets of Boston. Doubt gnawed at her resolve. What kind of man resorted to ordering a bride from a catalog? She'd seen his letter, of course neat handwriting describing a successful cattle ranch, promises of a comfortable home and assurances of respectful treatment. But words on paper revealed so little about a man's true character. First time heading west, miss. Darcy turned to find an elderly woman with kind eyes settling into the seat across from her, hands folded primly over a worn Bible. Yes, madam, Darcy admitted, smoothing her travel-wrinkled skirt. I'm to be married in Whispering Pines. The woman's eyebrows lifted. Mail-order bride, then. You're not the first young woman I've seen making this journey. Some find happiness, others. Her voice trailed off meaningfully. I'm hoping for happiness, Darcy said, more firmly than she felt. Mr. Blackwell seems respectable in his letters. Whispering Pines is a rough town, dear. Not quite civilized yet. The men outnumber women 20-1. The woman leaned forward. You keep your wits about you, and if things aren't as promised, the stagecoach runs east twice a month. The train whistle pierced the air as they approached another small station. Darcy's stomach knotted with each mile closer to her destination. By nightfall, they reached the final railway stop at Silver Creek, still 30 miles from Whispering Pines. End of the line for the railroad, folks, the conductor called. Those heading to Whispering Pines, the stagecoach leaves at dawn. Darcy gathered her belongings and stepped onto the platform, immediately struck by the harsh reality of frontier life. Silver Creek was little more than a collection of rough buildings, dominated by a saloon whose raucous laughter spilled into the dusty street. The station master directed her to the town's only boarding house, where she spent a restless night listening to distant piano music and occasional gunshots. Morning came with biting cold and gray skies. The stagecoach was little more than a weathered wagon with hard wooden benches, driven by a leathery man who chewed tobacco and spoke little. Darcy found herself wedged between a traveling salesman and a grizzled miner. As the stagecoach lurched forward, she clutched her carpetbag and prayed that Thomas Blackwell would be everything his letters had promised. Hours later, the stagecoach rolled into Whispering Pines. The town was larger than Silver Creek, but maintained the same rough-hewn character, a main street lined with wooden buildings, horses hitched to posts, men in dusty clothes moving with purpose. The church steeple stood as the tallest structure, a beacon of civilization in the wilderness. Town hall's where new arrivals check in, the driver said, helping Darcy down. Just down the street. Darcy smoothed her travel-worn dress, pinned back a loose strand of auburn hair, and made her way to the town hall. Inside, a clerk sat behind a large desk, squinting at ledgers through wire-rimmed spectacles. Excuse me, Darcy said. I'm Darcy Miller, arrived from Boston. I'm to meet Thomas Blackwell. The clerk looked up, adjusting his spectacles. Blackwell, let me check the register. He flipped through pages of a large book. Ah, here we are. Blackwell Thomas, expected a mail-order bride named. His finger traced along the line, then stopped. Darcy noticed the hesitation immediately. Is something wrong? She asked. The clerk cleared his throat. Well, miss, it appears there's been some alteration. Your name is listed here, but it's been. He turned the ledger toward her. Darcy's heart sank as she saw her name clearly scratched out with a single decisive line. There must be some mistake, she whispered, panic rising in her throat. I'm afraid not, miss. According to our records, Mr. Blackwell sent word 3 weeks ago. Apparently, he received a letter from the agency offering him a different bride younger with experience as a midwife. He changed his selection. The clerk shifted uncomfortably. These things happen sometimes. The agency should have notified you. The room seemed to tilt beneath Darcy's feet. 3,000 miles from home in a strange town with barely $20 to her name and nowhere to go. Is Mr. Blackwell in town? Perhaps if I spoke with him. He's not, miss. His ranch is a day's ride north, and he was in last week for supplies. Won't be back for a month or more. The clerk's expression held a mixture of pity and discomfort. The Paradise Hotel might have worked for a woman, as a laundress or cook's helper perhaps. Darcy knew what work for a woman often meant in frontier towns. She gathered her dignity and asked, "Is there a respectable boarding house where I might stay while I consider my options?" Mrs. Holloway runs a clean place, 2 doors down from the church. Tell her Mr. Peterson sent you. He hesitated. You might also speak with Sheriff Davidson. Sometimes he knows of families needing help. Darcy thanked him with all the composure she could muster and stepped back into the street. The afternoon sun beat down on her as the reality of her situation sank in. She was truly alone, abandoned by the man who had promised to marry her in a town where she knew no one. As she stood there, a commotion erupted from the saloon across the street. A man stumbled through the batwing doors, followed by another who shoved him roughly into the dirt. The fallen man scrambled to his feet, hand hovering near his holster. "Draw then, Yates," the second man shouted. "Or admit you cheated. You're drunk, Wilson," the man called Yates replied calmly. "Go sleep it off before you do something stupid." Darcy froze, not wanting to draw attention to herself during what appeared to be the prelude to a gunfight. The man named Yates was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair visible beneath a well-worn Stetson. Unlike his adversary, he appeared completely sober and in control. "Sheriff." Someone called and a third man appeared, star pinned to his vest. "That's enough, Wilson," the sheriff said firmly. "Mr. Yates here wasn't cheating. I was watching the game myself." Wilson spat in the dirt but backed down when the sheriff rested his hand on his own revolver. With a final glare at Yates, Wilson stomped back into the saloon. The man called Yates dusted himself off, nodded his thanks to the sheriff, and turned, meeting Darcy's gaze across the street. For a moment they simply looked at each other. Then his eyes dropped to her carpetbag and the folded papers clutched in her hand. Something like understanding crossed his face. Darcy quickly looked away and began walking toward the church to find Mrs. Holloway's boarding house. Behind her, she heard boot steps approaching. "Miss." "Excuse me, miss." She turned to find Yates removing his hat, revealing a full head of dark hair with the barest touches of silver at the temples. His face was tanned and weathered, but his eyes were surprisingly gentle, a clear blue that reminded her of summer skies over Boston Harbor. "Yes." She replied cautiously. "Yankee Davis, madam. Most folks call me Yates." He gestured to her bag. "Just arrived on the stage, I take it." "Darcy Miller," she replied, not offering her hand. "And yes, though I'm beginning to think it was a terrible mistake." He nodded, seeming to read more in her expression than she intended to reveal. "Let me guess. Mail-order bride whose situation didn't work out as planned." Darcy stiffened. "That's rather presumptuous, Mr. Yates." "No offense meant, Miss Miller. We get about a dozen brides through here each year. Some find what they're looking for, others." He shrugged. "I couldn't help noticing you coming from the town hall looking like you'd seen a ghost." "My personal affairs are hardly your concern," Darcy said, though her voice lacked conviction. She was in no position to rebuff potentially helpful locals. Yates nodded, accepting the rebuke. "Fair enough. But if you're headed to Mrs. Holloway's, I'm going that direction myself. These streets can be rowdy this time of day." Darcy hesitated, then nodded her acceptance. As they walked, she noted that despite his rough appearance, Yates had the manner of an educated man. His speech lacked the crude quality of the men she'd encountered on her journey. "Have you lived in Whispering Pines long, Mr. Yates?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Going on 8 years now." "Came west after the war, like many men. You fought in the war between the states." "Union cavalry," he confirmed. "Afterward, there wasn't much left for me back east." They reached a neat white clapboard house with a sign reading Holloway Boarding House hanging above the porch. Before they could ascend the steps, the door opened to reveal a stout woman with iron gray hair pulled into a severe bun. "Mr. Yates," she said, eyeing him suspiciously, "this isn't your usual haunt." "Mrs. Holloway," he greeted her politely. "I'm escorting Miss Miller, who's just arrived and needs lodging." The woman's shrewd eyes took in Darcy's travel-worn appearance. Another mail-order bride situation gone sour, I'd wager. When Darcy's eyes widened in surprise, Mrs. Holloway snorted. "Girl, you're not the first, and you won't be the last. Men out here get particular ideas about what they want, then change their minds when something better comes along." "I can pay," Darcy said quickly. "For a week at least." Mrs. Holloway's expression softened slightly. "Room and board is $1 a day. I serve breakfast at 6 and supper at 6. You miss it, you go hungry." "That's very fair," Darcy said, relieved. Mrs. Holloway glanced at Yates. "You vouching for her, Mr. Yates?" "I am," he said without hesitation. Something unspoken passed between them before Mrs. Holloway nodded. "Very well. Come in, Miss Miller. I'll show you to your room." Darcy turned to thank Yates, but he was already placing his hat back on his head. "Mrs. Holloway runs a good house," he said. "You'll be safe here." "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Yates," he smiled then, transforming his weathered face. "Welcome to Whispering Pines, Miss Miller. It's not Boston, but it has its charms." With a tip of his hat, he turned and walked back toward the main street. Darcy followed Mrs. Holloway inside, where the older woman showed her to a small but clean room on the second floor. Bathrooms at the end of the hall. Saturday's bath day unless you want to pay extra. Once alone, Darcy sank onto the narrow bed and finally allowed herself to cry. The tears came silently, years of self-discipline preventing her from making a sound that might be heard through the thin walls. She had gambled everything on this journey west, and now she was stranded, her future as uncertain as the frontier itself. After washing her face and changing into her one spare dress, Darcy ventured downstairs for the evening meal. The dining room held a long table where several other boarders already sat: two elderly sisters who taught at the local school, a young man who worked at the bank, and a middle-aged woman who ran the town's millinery shop. "Everyone, this is Miss Miller, just arrived from Boston," Mrs. Holloway announced. "Miss Miller, meet your fellow boarders." Conversation flowed around Darcy as she ate the simple but hearty stew. She learned that Whispering Pines had grown rapidly in the past 5 years, fueled by the cattle industry and the discovery of silver in the nearby mountains. The town boasted a school, 3 churches, a bank, and even a small opera house where traveling companies performed occasionally. "You'll need employment, I expect," said Miss Winters, the older of the teacher sisters. "The school could use an assistant. Can you read and write well?" "Very well," Darcy answered eagerly. "I worked as a bookkeeper at Lowell Mills before it closed." "A bookkeeper?" Mr. Harrison, the bank clerk, looked interested. "The bank manager was just saying yesterday that we need someone with a head for figures. Too much business these days for just the 2 of us to handle." For the first time since seeing her name scratched from the ledger, Darcy felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps she could build a life here after all, on her own terms rather than as someone's mail-order wife. After dinner, Darcy excused herself to write a letter to the marriage agency in Boston, informing them of the situation and requesting a refund of her placement fee. She doubted she would see the money, but the act of writing helped restore her sense of control. The next morning, Darcy presented herself at the bank, where the manager, Mr. Fulton, interviewed her briefly before offering her a position as an assistant clerk at a salary of $15 a week, less than she'd earned in Boston, but enough to live on in Whispering Pines. "You're heaven sent, Miss Miller," Mr. Fulton declared. "These cowboys can barely write their names, let alone keep proper accounts. Having someone with actual experience is a blessing." Darcy spent her first day learning the bank systems, which were considerably less sophisticated than those she'd known in Boston. By closing time, she had already identified several inefficiencies she could improve. As she stepped outside, she was surprised to see Yankee Yates leaning against a hitching post across the street. He straightened when he saw her, crossing to meet her. "Heard you found work at the bank," he said, falling into step beside her. "News travels fast in small towns." "So I'm learning," Darcy replied. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned you own the largest cattle ranch in the territory." Yates shrugged modestly. "The Double Y isn't the largest, but we do all right. Started with just 20 head after the war, built it up to over 2,000 now." "Impressive," Darcy said genuinely. "You must employ many men. 15 hands year-round, more during roundup." He glanced at her. "Actually, that's part of why I wanted to speak with you. My ranch manager quit last month, heading to California with gold fever. I need someone who can keep the books, handle payroll, and manage correspondence with cattle buyers." Darcy stopped walking. "Are you offering me a position, Mr. Yates?" "I am. Pays $25 a week, plus room and board at the ranch house. It's comfortable, not fancy, but solid." "You'd have your own quarters, of course." He seemed slightly uncomfortable. "I know it might seem improper, an unmarried woman living at a bachelor's ranch, but my housekeeper, Mrs. Gunderson, is a respectable widow who'd vouch for your reputation." "Why me? You hardly know me." "Fulton at the bank said you spotted 3 accounting errors your first morning. That's the kind of sharp eye I need." He paused. "Plus, it's quiet at the ranch, might be a good place to recover from disappointments." Darcy considered the offer. It was significantly more money than the bank paid, and the prospect of living outside town, away from curious eyes and whispers about the abandoned mail-order bride, was appealing. "I'd need references," she said cautiously. "Ask anyone in town about Yankee Yates. Sheriff, bank manager, preacher, anyone." His confidence wasn't boastful, just matter of fact. "May I think about it overnight, of course. I'm heading back to the ranch tomorrow afternoon. If you decide to accept, meet me at the general store at 2 o'clock. He tipped his hat. "Good evening, Miss Miller." That night, Darcy discreetly inquired about Yates from her fellow boarders. Their responses were uniformly positive. Despite his occasional presence in the saloon, Yates was known as an honest businessman, a fair employer, and a generous contributor to the town's church and school. During a harsh winter 3 years prior, he had opened his ranch to several families who had lost their homes to fire, feeding and sheltering them for months. "Why hasn't he married?" Darcy asked Mrs. Holloway as they washed dishes after dinner, the older woman's hands stilled briefly. "He was engaged once, about 5 years back, pretty young thing from Sacramento. She came out to the ranch for the wedding, took one look at frontier life and caught the next stage east." Mrs. Holloway shook her head. "Broke something in him, I think. He's been married to that ranch ever since." By morning, Darcy had made her decision. She gave notice at the bank, thanking Mr. Fulton for the opportunity, but explaining that the ranch position better suited her skills and offered superior compensation. Though disappointed, he understood. At 2 o'clock, Darcy stood outside the general store with her carpet bag, watching as Yates drove up in a wagon loaded with supplies. He seemed surprised but pleased to see her. "You've decided to accept, then?" he asked, helping her onto the wagon seat. "I have, with conditions," Darcy replied firmly. "I'll require a written contract specifying my duties, compensation, and living arrangements, and I reserve the right to return to town if the situation proves unsuitable." Rather than being offended, Yates looked impressed. Sensible terms. "I'd expect nothing less from a woman with your business acumen." The journey to the Double Y Ranch took 3 hours, during which Darcy learned more about her new employer. Yankee Davis had grown up in Vermont, the son of a successful merchant who had expected him to join the family business. Instead, he had attended Yale briefly before the war interrupted his studies. After 4 years of fighting, he'd found civilian life in the East suffocating and headed west seeking open spaces and new beginnings. "What about you, Miss Miller?" he asked. "What led a Boston bookkeeper to become a mail-order bride?" Darcy hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "Necessity. When the mill closed, there were suddenly hundreds of women competing for every available position. My parents died in a typhoid outbreak when I was 16, leaving me with no family and few prospects." She stared at the distant mountains. The marriage agency painted a romantic picture of Western life and respectable ranchers seeking companions. It seemed a practical solution. And then Blackwell changed his mind, Yates said quietly. You know him. Every rancher in the territory knows the others, at least by reputation. Blackwell runs a modest spread about 30 miles north. He's not a bad sort, just... Yates seemed to search for the right words. He's a man who's always looking for a better deal. The wagon crested a hill, revealing a sweeping valley below. In the distance, a collection of buildings nestled against the backdrop of pine-covered mountains. Welcome to the Double Y, Yates said, a note of pride in his voice. As they drew closer, Darcy was impressed by the orderliness of the ranch. The main house was a substantial two-story structure built of squared logs with a deep porch wrapping around three sides. Nearby stood a bunkhouse, barn, smithy, and various outbuildings, all well-maintained. Men moved purposefully between structures, tipping their hats respectfully as Yates drove past. A large woman with a ruddy face emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. Mrs. Gunderson, Yates called, we have a new ranch manager. This is Miss Darcy Miller from Boston. The housekeeper's eyebrows rose slightly at the sight of a young woman, but she quickly masked her surprise. Welcome to Double Y, Miss Miller. I've prepared the east bedroom for you. It has its own entrance from the side porch, very proper. Thank you, Mrs. Gunderson, Darcy replied, relieved by the thoughtful arrangement. Yates showed Darcy to a spacious office off the main parlor, where ledgers and correspondence were stacked in haphazard piles. My attempts at organization, he said ruefully. I'm afraid business paperwork isn't my strength. I can see that, Darcy said, unable to keep the dismay from her voice as she surveyed the chaos. Yates laughed. I warned you it was a mess. I'll leave you to get acquainted with it. Dinner's at 7, but first I'll show you to your room. The east bedroom proved to be larger than Darcy had expected, with a comfortable bed, washstand, wardrobe, and even a small writing desk beneath a window overlooking the mountains. As promised, a door opened onto a small section of the porch, screened from the main entrance by a trellis of climbing roses. It's lovely, Darcy said, genuinely pleased. Mrs. Gunderson added the feminine touches, Yates admitted. I told her I was hiring a woman from back east. After Yates left, Darcy unpacked her meager belongings and sat on the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the swift change in her circumstances. 3 days ago, she had been traveling to marry a stranger. Now she was employed by a different stranger, living in his home, responsible for his business affairs. One day at a time, she whispered to herself, a mantra that had carried her through many difficult periods. The following weeks established a rhythm to Darcy's new life. She rose early, taking breakfast with Yates and the ranch foreman, a taciturn man named Johnson, who gradually warmed to her as she demonstrated her competence with the ranch accounts. Mornings were spent organizing the chaotic records, implementing a proper bookkeeping system, and writing letters to cattle buyers. Afternoons often found her accompanying Yates as he inspected different sections of his vast property, allowing her to understand the operation she was helping to manage. Darcy discovered that Yates was not only a skilled rancher, but also a surprisingly well-read man. His personal library contained volumes of Emerson, Thoreau, Shakespeare, and various historical works. In the evenings after dinner, they often discussed books or played chess before the fireplace, while Mrs. Gunderson knitted nearby, her presence ensuring propriety. One evening in late September, as autumn painted the surrounding forests in brilliant golds and reds, Darcy sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset. Yates emerged from the barn and joined her, offering a cup of coffee. The books are in excellent order now, he remarked. Johnson says you've saved us nearly $300 by finding billing errors from the mercantile. It wasn't difficult, Darcy replied modestly. They were consistently overcharging for grain shipments. Still, it's more than I managed to catch. He sipped his coffee. You've transformed this place in just a month. Everything runs more smoothly. Darcy felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. I enjoy the work. It's satisfying to bring order to chaos. Is that why you agreed to become a mail-order bride? Seeking order after the chaos of losing your position in Boston, the personal question caught her off guard. Partly, she admitted, but also because I wanted. She hesitated, searching for the right words. I wanted to belong somewhere to someone. Is that terribly old-fashioned? Not at all. Yates set his cup down, his expression thoughtful. I think that's what most of us want when it comes down to it, a place to belong. Their eyes met briefly before Darcy looked away, suddenly conscious of a shifting dynamic between them. Over the past weeks, her employer had become something more a friend, certainly, but lately she had found herself noticing things she shouldn't. The way sunlight caught in his dark hair, the gentle handling of injured animals, the respect his men showed him. The first snow will come soon, Yates said, breaking the moment. Winter arrives early in these mountains. I've never experienced a frontier winter, Darcy admitted. Is it very harsh? It can be. We get snowed in sometimes for weeks. He glanced at her. Some people find the isolation difficult. I'm not easily frightened by solitude, Mr. Yates. After a month, I think you might call me Yankee, he suggested. At least when we're not conducting business, Darcy smiled. Very well, Yankee, and you should call me Darcy. Their conversation was interrupted by a rider approaching at speed. Johnson emerged from the bunkhouse, hand resting on his holster until he recognized the visitor. It's Calvin from the Henderson place, he called to Yates. The young cowboy reined his lathered horse to a stop. Mr. Yates. Doc Williams sent me. There's been an accident at Blackwell's ranch, a barn raising gone wrong. Several men hurt bad, including Blackwell himself. Doc needs help getting the injured to town. Darcy froze at the mention of Blackwell's name. Yates glanced at her, then back to Calvin. How many wagons will you need? At least 2. And blankets, bandages, whatever you can spare. Yates was already moving. Johnson, have the men hitch the wagon teams. I'll take the big wagon, you take the second. Miss Miller, could you gather medical supplies, Mrs. Gunderson will know what we have. Within 20 minutes, 2 wagons stood ready, loaded with blankets and the ranch's limited medical supplies. Yates approached Darcy as she handed a box of bandages to Johnson. Will you be all right here alone? He asked quietly. This feels like poor timing, considering. I'm fine, Darcy assured him. These men need help, regardless of my personal history with Mr. Blackwell. Yates studied her face, then nodded. We'll likely be gone overnight. If all goes well, we'll be back by tomorrow evening. After the wagons departed, Darcy found herself at loose ends. She tried to focus on ranch accounts, but her mind kept returning to Thomas Blackwell, the man who had rejected her sight unseen, who now lay injured, possibly dying. She felt no satisfaction in his misfortune, only a strange sense of fate's wheel turning. That night, a storm blew in from the mountains, rattling windows and howling around the eaves. Darcy lay awake, wondering if the wagons had reached town before the weather worsened. Her concern, she realized, was primarily for Yates's safety rather than Blackwell's condition. Morning brought clearing skies but no sign of the returning men. Darcy kept busy, helping Mrs. Gunderson prepare meals for the remaining ranch hands and reviewing supply inventories. By evening, with still no word, worry had firmly taken hold. Should we send someone to check on them? She asked the cook. In this country, Miss Miller, no news is often just that, no news. The creek might have flooded with that rain, forcing them to take the long way back. Mrs. Gunderson patted Darcy's hand. Mr. Yates knows these mountains better than anyone. He'll be back when he can. It was nearly midnight when Darcy, unable to sleep, heard the sound of wagon wheels in the yard. She threw a shawl over her nightdress and hurried to the window, relief flooding through her at the sight of Yates climbing down from the driver's seat, apparently unharmed. Without thinking, she grabbed a lantern and rushed out to meet him. In the yellow light, his face looked drawn with fatigue, but he smiled when he saw her. You should be asleep, he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. I was worried, Darcy admitted. When you didn't return this afternoon, the creek was running high. We had to detour. He ran a hand through his hair. It was a bad scene at Blackwell's. The main support beam gave way during the raising. 2 men died, 3 others badly hurt. Darcy's hand flew to her mouth. And Mr. Blackwell, broken leg, cracked ribs. He'll recover, but he'll be laid up for months. Yates hesitated. He asked about you, me, but he's never even met me. Apparently he recognized your name when Johnson mentioned our new ranch manager. Seems he's been feeling guilty about the way things transpired. Darcy didn't know how to respond to this information. After a moment she asked, "Are you hungry? I could warm something from dinner." Yates nodded gratefully. That would be welcome. In the kitchen, Darcy built up the fire and heated a plate of stew while Yates washed at the sink. They sat across from each other at the table, the house quiet except for the occasional pop from the stove. Blackwell asked if you might visit him, Yates said finally. He's at Doc Williams' house in town, says he wants to apologize in person. Darcy set down her cup. I don't know if that's necessary. It's entirely your choice. Yates studied her face. But sometimes confronting these things directly helps put them to rest. She considered his words. Perhaps you're right. I could go when next you head to town for supplies. That would be day after tomorrow. He finished his stew and pushed back from the table. Thank you for waiting up. It was comforting to find someone concerned about my return. Their eyes met across the table and something unspoken passed between them. Then Yates stood, breaking the moment. We should both get some sleep. Morning comes early, regardless of midnight conversations. 2 days later, Darcy found herself seated beside Yates on the wagon bound for Whispering Pines. Her emotions a complicated mixture of apprehension and curiosity about finally meeting the man who had unwittingly altered the course of her life. You don't have to go through with this, Yates reminded her as they approached town. I know, Darcy replied, but I think I need to see him to make him real rather than just a name on a scratched ledger. Doc Williams' house stood at the edge of town, a neat clapboard structure with a small sign identifying it as both residence and medical office. The doctor, a harried-looking man with spectacles perched on his nose, led them to a back room where Thomas Blackwell lay in bed, his leg elevated in a complex splint. Blackwell was younger than Darcy had expected, perhaps 35, with sandy hair and a face that might have been handsome before pain and injury etched lines around his eyes and mouth. Those eyes widened when he saw Darcy. Miss Miller, he asked, his voice strained, you actually came, Mr. Blackwell, Darcy acknowledged, keeping her voice neutral. I understand you wish to speak with me. Yates remained by the door, a silent but reassuring presence. Please sit down, Blackwell gestured to a chair beside the bed. As Darcy complied, he continued, I owe you an apology, Miss Miller. What I did changing brides without proper notification was unconscionable. May I ask why? Darcy's composure surprised even herself. Was there something in my letters that concerned you? Blackwell looked ashamed. Nothing at all. Your letters were lovely, educated, thoughtful. But then the agency sent word about another candidate who had midwifery skills. He glanced toward his splinted leg. My nearest neighbor is 15 miles away. Having a wife with medical knowledge seemed prudent. I see. Darcy folded her hands in her lap. A practical decision, then. Practical but cowardly. I should have written to you directly. Blackwell shifted uncomfortably. The irony is the other bride never arrived. Apparently she accepted a proposal in St. Louis during her journey west. Despite everything, Darcy felt a slight smile tug at her lips. It seems fate has a sense of humor, Mr. Blackwell. Indeed it does. He gestured toward Yates. And now I hear you're managing Yates's ranch, doing a fine job of it too, according to Johnson. Miss Miller has transformed my operation, Yates confirmed from the doorway. Best decision I ever made, hiring her. Something in his tone caused both Darcy and Blackwell to look at him sharply. Darcy felt a flush rise to her cheeks at the undisguised admiration in Yates's expression. Well, Blackwell said after a moment, it seems things have worked out for the best, though I doubt you'll ever forgive me for the distress I caused. Actually, Mr. Blackwell, I find I'm rather grateful, Darcy said, surprising herself with the truth of it. Had you not changed your mind, I would never have found my current position, which suits me far better than being a rancher's wife. After a few more minutes of conversation, they took their leave. Outside, Yates helped Darcy into the wagon, his hand lingering on her slightly longer than necessary. You handled that with remarkable grace, he observed as they drove away. It was oddly liberating, Darcy admitted. Seeing him as just a man, not the villain I'd built up in my mind, nor the romantic figure I'd imagined from his letters, just a man making decisions based on what he thought best. Still, what he did was wrong. Yes, but I can't regret the outcome, she glanced at Yates. Can you? His eyes remained on the road, but a smile played at the corners of his mouth. Not for a moment. As autumn deepened into winter, life at the Double Y settled into a comfortable routine. Heavy snows often isolated the ranch for days at a time, but the main house was warm and well-stocked. During these quiet periods, Darcy found herself growing closer to Yates. Their evening conversations by the fire ranged from literature to philosophy to politics, and she discovered in him a mind as hungry for intellectual stimulation as her own. December brought preparations for Christmas, with Mrs. Gunderson baking for days and the ranch hands cutting a massive pine tree for the parlor. Darcy found herself unexpectedly emotional as she helped decorate the tree, remembering childhood Christmases with her parents. "First Christmas away from home?" Yates asked, finding her alone in the parlor one evening staring at the decorated tree. "First Christmas feeling like I have a home again," Darcy replied softly. Yates moved to stand beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. "I'm glad you feel that way about the Double Y. It's not just the place," she said, gathering her courage. "It's the people." His hand found hers in the firelit dimness, fingers intertwining. Darcy, the moment was broken by Mrs. Gunderson entering with a tray of hot cider. Yates stepped away, but the charged atmosphere lingered between them. Christmas Day dawned bright and clear, with sunlight glittering off snow-laden branches. After breakfast, gifts were exchanged among the ranch household. Darcy had knitted scarves for the hands and a fine woolen vest for Yates, who seemed genuinely touched by the personal gift. "I have something for you as well," he said, handing her a small package. Inside, Darcy found a leather-bound copy of Emerson's essays, the same edition they had discussed during their first evening conversations. Opening the cover, she found an inscription. "To Darcy, who brought order to chaos and light to darkness. With deepest admiration, Yankee." "It's perfect," she whispered, meeting his eyes. "Thank you." Later that evening, after the hands had retired to the bunkhouse and Mrs. Gunderson to her room, Darcy and Yates sat before the fire playing chess. The comfortable silence between them was interrupted only by the crackling flames and the occasional soft click of pieces on the board. "Checkmate," Darcy announced, moving her queen into final position. Yates studied the board, then laughed. Outmaneuvered again. "You're a formidable opponent, Miss Miller, in chess, perhaps." She began resetting the pieces. "In life, I've often felt several moves behind. Not anymore, I think." Yates reached across the board, stilling her hands. "Darcy, there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you." Her heart quickened. Yes, your contract with the ranch expires next week. This was not what she had expected. "Oh, yes, I suppose it does. I'd like to propose a new arrangement." "What sort of arrangement?" Darcy asked carefully. Yates stood, moving to the fireplace, his back to her. "When I hired you, I needed a ranch manager, someone to bring order to my chaotic affairs." He turned to face her. "I never expected to find a woman who would change everything, not just my books, but my home, my thoughts, my heart." Darcy remained motionless, hardly daring to breathe. "I've come to care for you, Darcy, more than I thought possible after." He shook his head. "After my previous disappointment, I find myself thinking of you first thing each morning and last thing each night." "Yankee," she began, but he raised a hand. "Please, let me finish. I'm not offering another employment contract. I'm asking if you might consider a different kind of partnership." He moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I'm asking if you would consider becoming my wife." Tears sprang to Darcy's eyes. "But I came west to marry another man." Fate had other plans. His blue eyes searched hers. "I'm not Thomas Blackwell. I'm not offering a practical arrangement or a business transaction. I'm offering my heart completely." "I don't know what to say," Darcy whispered. "Say you'll think about it." He brought her hand to his lips. "That's all I ask for now." That night, Darcy lay awake long after the house had gone silent, her mind whirling with unexpected possibilities. She had come to Montana territory resigned to a marriage of convenience with a stranger. Now she faced the prospect of marrying a man she had come to respect deeply, a man who stirred feelings in her that she had never anticipated. By morning, her path was clear. She found Yates in his office, reviewing breeding records for the spring calving season. "I've considered your proposal," she said without preamble. He set down his pencil, expression guarded. "And I have conditions." A smile tugged at his mouth. "Of course you do. I want to continue managing the ranch accounts. I've worked too hard organizing them to see them fall back into disarray." "Agreed. I want us to expand the lending library for the schoolhouse in town. These children need exposure to great literature and ideas. A worthy project, and I want—" She hesitated, then continued firmly, "I want us to wait until spring for the wedding. I need to be certain this isn't just the isolation of winter or gratitude for your kindness influencing my decision." Yates stood and came around the desk, taking her hands. "Are these your only conditions?" "There's one more." Darcy looked directly into his eyes. "I want to hear you say you love me, not that you care for me or admire me, but that you love me." "Darcy Miller," he said softly, "I have loved you since the moment you faced down Thomas Blackwell with such dignity and grace. I love your brilliant mind, your steadfast heart, your quiet strength. I would wait until every snow in these mountains melted if that's what you needed." "Then yes," she whispered, "I will marry you." He drew her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that made her heart soar. When they finally parted, both were smiling. "I should warn you," Yates said, "once word gets out that the confirmed bachelor of Whispering Pines is finally marrying, we'll never hear the end of it." "I can handle town gossip," Darcy assured him. "After all, I've already survived having my name scratched from one man's ledger." Spring arrived in a rush of melting snow and new growth. The wedding was set for early May, when wildflowers would carpet the valley and travel would be easy for guests coming from distant ranches. 2 weeks before the wedding, Yates rode into town on business, returning with an unexpected expression of concern. "What's wrong?" Darcy asked as he handed the reins to a stable hand. "Nothing's wrong, exactly." He helped her down from the porch. "I need to show you something in my office." Inside, he unlocked his desk drawer and removed a document. "I visited Judge Parker today to update my will." "Your will?" Darcy's brow furrowed. "Is there something you haven't told me about your health?" "No, nothing like that." He handed her the document. "It's standard practice when one's circumstances change significantly. I wanted everything in proper order before our wedding." Darcy scanned the legal language, then stopped abruptly at a particular clause. There, in formal script, was her name not scratched out but prominently featured. "To my beloved wife, Darcy Miller Yates, I bequeath the entirety of the Double Y Ranch and all associated properties, livestock, and accounts." "Yankee," she breathed, looking up at him. "I wanted you to see it, to understand that your name isn't just added to some ledger this time. It's written into my future, my legacy." His expression was solemn. "No one will ever scratch your name from my life, Darcy." Tears filled her eyes. "You remarkable man." "Is that a favorable review of my will writing skills?" He teased gently. "It's a favorable review of your heart." She rose on tiptoes to kiss him. "And I can't wait to become Darcy Yates." The wedding day dawned clear and perfect. The ceremony was held on the ranch, beneath an arch of spring blossoms with the mountains as backdrop. It seemed the entire territory had turned out ranchers and townspeople alike, curious to witness the union of the mail-order bride who had found her place in an unexpected way. Even Thomas Blackwell attended, still walking with a cane but recovered enough to offer sincere congratulations. "It seems fate knew better than I did," he told Darcy, who could only agree. As Darcy and Yankee exchanged vows, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her west, not to the marriage she had anticipated, but to a deeper, truer partnership than she could have imagined. Her name, once scratched from a town ledger, was now permanently inscribed in a man's heart and will, in a home and land that had become her own. That night, after the celebrations ended and they were finally alone, Yates led her to the porch where they had shared so many conversations. In the moonlight, the valley spread before them, their valley now, their shared domain. "Are you happy, Mrs. Yates?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," Darcy replied honestly. "When I left Boston, I thought I was heading toward security at best. I never imagined I would find true love, nor did I after Eliza left." He turned to face her. "You healed something in me I thought would always remain broken. And you showed me that sometimes, having your name scratched from one ledger leads to having it written somewhere infinitely more important." As they sealed this truth with a kiss, Darcy knew with absolute certainty that her journey west, with all its unexpected turns, had led her exactly where she was meant to be. 5 years later, Darcy sat on the same porch, watching Yankee chase their 3-year-old daughter Sarah through the spring wildflowers while their infant son Robert slept in her arms. The Double Y had prospered beyond all expectations under their joint management. The ranch now employed 30 hands year-round, had expanded its holdings by another 1,000 acres, and was known throughout the territory for its progressive business practices, including a schoolhouse for the ranch children and families. Darcy's lending library project had grown into a proper town library, housed in a new building the Yates had helped fund. Twice monthly, she still taught bookkeeping classes to young women in Whispering Pines, encouraging them toward independence. Thomas Blackwell had eventually married a widow from Helena, and they occasionally joined the Yates for dinner when business brought them to the area. The awkwardness of their initial connection had faded into a genuine, if unlikely, friendship. "Mama, look what Papa found." Sarah came running up the steps, clutching a perfect blue butterfly in her cupped hands. "It's beautiful, darling," Darcy said, smiling as Yankee climbed the steps after their daughter, his hair now liberally streaked with silver but his blue eyes as bright as ever. "Just like her mother," he said, winking at Darcy before turning to Sarah. "Why don't you let the butterfly go now? Remember what we said about wild things. They need to be free," Sarah recited, carefully opening her hands. The butterfly hesitated, then fluttered away on the spring breeze. As Yankee settled beside her on the porch swing, Darcy leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. From mail-order bride with a scratched-out name to beloved wife, mother, and respected businesswoman, her journey had been unexpected but perfect in its own way. "What are you thinking about?" Yankee asked, gently touching their sleeping son's cheek. "About ledgers and wills and how sometimes the end of one chapter is just the beginning of a much better story," he smiled, understanding as he always did. "I'd say our story turned out pretty well, Mrs. Yates. Better than any book in our library," Darcy agreed, lifting her face for his kiss as the Montana sunset painted their world in gold.